Welcome back to another Chalk or Not segment. Oh, this time we're talking about UFC Mexico, where 10 of the 13 scheduled bouts are considered chalk. And again, my definition for chalk is anything that's minus 185 or wider. And like I said, 10 of the 13 fights are considered chalk for this matchup. So I will briefly go over every single one of those chalky matchups and provide you guys with my analysis in regards to whether it is chalk worthy or not, parlayable or not. I guess this segment is the best for people that love to throw together parlays. Last week, I think I pretty much swept the board in terms of the spots that should have been chalk and not in terms of Guram Gutateladze and Jordan Vucenic. Hopefully, I can provide you just as good and accurate of an assessment on this segment as I did last week. So hopefully you guys are finding it useful and insightful and helping you guys cash some parlays and avoid some landmines. All right. Let's get right into this bad boy. First matchup up we're going to talk about is Markel Medeiros coming in at minus 185 going up against Austin Hubbard. Now, Medeiros had a successful UFC debut last time around against Landon Quinones, where he dropped the first round but managed to just scrape by in the next two rounds to end up getting his win. This is a former Factory X product who has now moved down to the MMA lab and is taking this fight on short notice against veteran Austin Hubbard. Hubbard is also a fighter that used to be a Colorado native but has moved up to Chicago and training with the Valley Flow System team alongside welterweight champion Bilal Muhammad, Ignacio Bahamondes, Charles Radke, who also fights very shortly too. But I think this is a tough matchup for Medeiros to come through as chalk. I think Hubbard can be competitive in the striking realm, and I think his ability to mix it up with the grappling and the clinch game will definitely cause Medeiros some troubles here. And I also think that Hubbard has a better gas tank to go a hard 15 minutes if he needs to. Look for Hubbard to put together a solid output and high activity game plan here to really wear down Medeiros and start running away with this in deep water. And as you guys can tell, I'm really liking Hubbard as a dog. Thus, I consider Markel Medeiros to not be chalk-worthy in this fight. Next up, Jamal Emmers coming in at minus 310 going up against Gabriel Miranda. This should be a chaotic matchup. You know, Miranda is a guy that often keeps his foot on the gas, which is why 20 of his 24 professional fights have finished inside the distance. Not just inside the distance, but they've finished under 1.5 rounds. Emmers is a guy that could go to a decision if he wants to, but I think he has a good enough striking advantage here to really pick apart Miranda and finish him within a round and a half. But we've also seen Emmers make some very poor fight IQ mistakes that guys as dangerous as Miranda could be able to take advantage of. Miranda has finished 16 of his 17 fights by submission, and we saw Emmers get into a heel hook battle against a guy like Pat Sabatini and come out on the short end in the past. It would not surprise me if Miranda is able to do the same here. Maybe not a heel hook, but maybe a club and sub or finding a position where he can actually get the submission. Thus, even though I'm picking Emmers to win this matchup, I do not think he is chalk-worthy at minus 310. Next up, we got Rafa Garcia coming in at minus 500 going up against Vince Pichel. Pichel, very surprised that he's still in the UFC at this point in his career, 40 years old, obviously slowing down on a 2-fight losing streak, has had multiple surgeries and rehabs that he's had to come through to try to get back inside the cage, has a decent 7-4 record through his 11 fights in the 13 years that he's been in the UFC. It's just his ability to stay active and actually compete. He's going up against a much more well-rounded and a guy that's far closer to his prime in Rafa Garcia, who should be able to outstrike Pichel, maybe even get this into the grappling realm and have success there. But I think the youth advantage is going to be too much here for Garcia to fall short to Pichel. So minus 500 is kind of the limit I would play on Rafa Garcia, but I do think he is chalk-worthy in this fight, and I think he'll be able to avoid the veterans' sneaky tactics and overcome any type of experience advantage Pichel might have, and look for Garcia to grind this fight out and win it on the scorecards. And again, I think he's chalk-worthy. All right, next up, Lupita Godinez coming in at minus 225 going up against Julia Pilastri. Now, Godinez is on a 2-fight losing streak, but both of those fights have come against Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu wizards. You got Verna Jandiroba and Mackenzie Dern, who were able to really muzzle the game of Godinez, who couldn't confidently get off on her striking because the threat of the takedown, and then could not get to her wrestling game because the threat of the jiu-jitsu. But she doesn't have to worry about that too much here against Julia Pilastri. Pilastri Polastri might be a slightly better Muay Thai specialist, but I think Godinez can mix it up enough to eventually get this fight to the ground where she should have a decided advantage in the grappling realm. And I think she'll be able to shut down any type of reversals or submission attempts from Polastri and really grind her out down the stretch here to win this fight on the scorecards. And I think minus 225 is more than a fair line here to consider her chalk worthy. All right, next up, Atiba Gauthier coming in at minus 425, going up against Jose Medina. Very good matchmaking here in terms of the fact that you have a very raw and physical specimen and, maybe untapped potential in Atiba Gauthier going up against a very bad fighter and Jose Medina, who has very good durability. So we're going to see Gauthier's knockout power be challenged here. And if he's unable to get the finish against Medina, he's going to have to rely on his physicality to really grind out Medina and muzzle any type of offense coming back his way. Gauthier should win this fight, but considering how raw and green he is in certain aspects of his game and the durability of Medina, I could absolutely see a world where Medina is able to survive the early onslaught of Gauthier and really start to pick up in the second and third rounds, starting to up his volume and his output, ultimately out damaging Gauthier en route to a decision victory. With that said, I am not willing to pay anything on a guy of Medina's skill set who is just, the best thing about him is his durability. But I do not want to pay minus 425 on Gauthier either. Just as we saw the other week with Josias Musasa fumbling the bag as a minus 900 favorite against Carlos Vera. Now, obviously, Carlos Vera much better than Jose Medina, but Musasa is similar to Gauthier in the fact that they're still very raw. They're very physically gifted, but their technical skills could cause them to make some mistakes, and Medina could absolutely take advantage of that. Thus, I'm going to have to consider Gauthier as not chalk-worthy, even though I'm picking him to win this fight. All right, next up, Edgar Chairez coming in at minus 275, going up against CJ Vergara. Kind of surprised that the Chairez number has not started to widen more here. I think people are relying on Vergara's gameness and grittiness to really break down Chairez. But I think Chairez is just too aggressive and too good. He's not a contender by any means, but I think he's more dangerous in the striking realm, has a nasty Muay Thai game, very aggressive with his jiu-jitsu game as well should the fight hit the ground. And I think his cardio is good enough to go 15 minutes if he needs to. Vergara is a guy who has missed weight 3 out of his 7 UFC appearances. And if he misses weight once again, it's something that the UFC will obviously use against him. But it's also attributed to him having very poor performances. But even if he doesn't miss weight, I think Chairez can dictate the pace of this matchup and really put a hurting on Vergara. And I do think he is chalk-worthy here at minus 275. All right, next up, David Martinez. I believe it's David Martinez. Yeah, David Martinez coming in at minus 360, going up against Simon Oliveira, who's going to be making his return from over 2 years away from action. Now, last time Oliveira came up short against Daniel Marcos, and that was a card where we saw Marcos really start to show out, and obviously continuing his undefeated record now, we know how good Marcos is. But I think this is a bad stylistic matchup for Oliveira. Martinez utilizes a lot of mobile footwork, a lot of lateral movement, a lot of distance movement so that he can eventually crash the pocket and utilize combinations to touch up his opponents. I think Oliveira will often find himself getting walked onto big shots by Martinez here. And I think Martinez's striking defense and obviously footwork will keep him away from too much danger from Oliveira. Look for Martinez to shut down any type of grappling approach Oliveira might have, and I think he'll be able to touch him up, leading to an eventual knockout victory for the UFC debutant. I gotta go Martinez here, and I think he is chalk-worthy at minus 360. All right, next up, Raul Rosas Jr. coming in at minus 375, going up against Vince Morales. Morales obviously 0-2 now since returning to the UFC, which now brings his overall UFC record to 3-7. He just is not all that good on this platform, even though on the regional scene, he managed to put together a 5-fight winning streak to eventually get back to the UFC. But now that he's at this level, he can't seem to be transiting to any Ws. I think this is a perfect matchup for Rosas Jr. to get Morales into the grappling realm. And even though Morales has made grappling improvements throughout his career, I think he will still struggle with the side of Rosas Jr.'s game that will continue to, keep him in bad spots, control him, keep him on the defenses, keep him on his back, or even get the back of Morales and eventually grind out those positions as well. So I do like Rosas Jr. here. I think he is chalk worthy at minus 375, and I think he'll be able to nullify any type of striking advantage Vince Morales will have in this fight. All right, that brings us to our next matchup here between Joe Pyfer coming in at minus 300 going up against Kelvin Gastelum. Now, Pyfer is a guy that often relies on his early finishing capabilities to put opponents away. Otherwise, if he is forced to go into deep waters, things start to get a little bit iffy for him. Just as we saw when he lost his first UFC matchup against Jack Hermansson in a 5-round matchup. But now he's going up against a very durable and tough Kelvin Gastelum who has never been knocked out. If Pyfer is unable to get him out of there, I absolutely see a scenario where Kelvin Gastelum can take the momentum of this fight, land big shots of his own, maybe even get this into the grappling realm where he can slow Pyfer down. I love the experience advantage, not to mention the durability of Gastelum here to pull off the upset. And considering he was closer to plus 350 just a few days ago, now down to that plus 240 range, it's clear the public loves him just as I do. Thus, I'm going to have to make Joe Pyfer not chalk worthy in this spot. Now that brings us to the main event now, where Brandon Moreno, former champion, comes in at minus 230 going up against former title challenger Steve Erceg. Now Brandon Moreno obviously came in big against Amir Albazi back in November, where he was able to outstrike him and pretty much sweep him on the scorecards. And this matchup against Erceg, I think it can be very competitive, especially with the Muay Thai that Erceg brings to the table. But I think that Moreno could mix this game up well enough to get to his grappling, get some control time, and thwart the BJJ black belt of Erceg. But Erceg will be very live in this matchup. I think his straight shots down the pipe will allow him to be competitive in the striking realm, but I ultimately think the experience of Moreno and his 5-round capability will allow him to pull away in deep water. With that said, I still think there's a case that Erceg can do a good enough job in terms of at least winning 3 of the 5 rounds off of damage alone. I'm picking Moreno to win this matchup, but I'm kind of surprised the line continues to drive up at minus 230 now for the Mexican fighter, but I still have to go with him being considered as not chalk-worthy. Erceg will make this a scrap, and he'll make it very competitive, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up getting his hand raised. I'm going to pass on this fight, and like I said, I do not consider Brandon Moreno to be chalk-worthy in this fight. All right, there you guys go. Chalk or not for UFC Mexico. I will be back tomorrow for the quick picks version of the UFC Mexico breakdown. And again, Thursday, reminder, I will be dropping the Legacy Warriors podcast to talk about LFA 204, I believe it is. Let me just quickly get that number right here, 205, which goes down in Brazil. So yeah, a ton of content coming your way this week. Stay tuned. See you guys again tomorrow. Peace.